may repeat the question a little bit for the purpose of the tape, but I really appreciate the interaction. It was really good last week. Alright, we'll get started. Yes, good sound. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. This is the second lecture today on innovation via technology startups. Now a few questions, so we'll start with some housekeeping. These schedule changes from week to week. Now we happen to know it for this week, next week, and the following, so all the way until March 2nd, and it's written on the screen. What you will find is we've been doing this a number of years, and there's always some interaction between the different live modules. So this semester it's 6 hours with Professor Eager on total quality management. I'm teaching on the innovation process for technologies, and Mr. Steve Lyons is here today as well, and he is teaching on law and technology, intellectual properties, and all these pieces together, they are really part of the engineering process. Now, I do want to emphasize some of the deliverables. So a one-page summary is all I expect from you guys for following the 6 hours. And it was mentioned a number of times, what's the format? Do I use bullet? It is up to you. You want to throw a big image there because you think you can summarize my 6 hours in one image? You're welcome to do that. Maybe add a few sentences just to explain what the image is. You want to do bullets for each of the 6 hours? That's great. You want to expand on some of the examples. You want to ask me questions. That's a good way to make sure that I'm actually reading it. So it really is up to you, and I see a few new faces. I appreciate that, and I welcome the questions. So just make sure when I talk about questions between the hours, so let's say you follow this week, and because I'm not lecturing next week, you want to send me some questions or comments, please do so, and it's going to feed into the last 2 hours. So I guess what I'm saying is because there's always a delay between when we issue the video and when the class is taught, I'll say that what's happening all of this week, if you're not in class today but you want to send me some feedback, some questions, I will include them in the next hour or whenever I get them. I've already done that. Now, is there something else here? Oh. Online modules. You have a tremendous number of options. Some are 6 hours, some are 12 hours. It really is up to you. I do invite you to start early, so it's early in the semester, so you can to put those away. Let's say you want to learn about casting, about welding, about material selection. Those are all available. As far as the Stellar website, we try to populate it best we can, and in my case what I did is I picked what I thought would be the first to pick for you guys in terms of 6 hour modules, and I put all the lecture notes on Stellar. It's a zip file. It's got all the lecture notes to the slides. One is on physical metallurgy. Don't get too worried. It's for non-metallurgists to some extent, so it includes everybody here in the class. Talk about polymer deformation, heat treatment, and surface finishing. So one big topic here that I get a lot of questions when I present this live is metal corrosion and protection, because it applies to a lot of things people do in all departments here. The other one that I picked was a 6 hour on structural material and service, so going through the process of saying I'm going to build something, to specifying the materials for it, and really taking it step by step between essentially a drawing of what you want to get built to something that is actually fulfill the function with a reasonable factor of safety. And it does include some examples of failure analysis as well. So it's relatively comprehensive module. Okay, any questions about the class in general, how we Okay, you have your term paper, you're aware of that, and that really is what it is. We want to foster autonomy and helping you guys learn by yourself on things that you want to learn. Okay, today I'm going to go back a little bit to how you go from an idea of innovation, and again, we're more specifically on technology innovation, so I'm not really talking, what I'm discussing in classes are really directly applied with software, startup, things like that. So we have a technology and we want to execute some plans to put it out there for useful use, and it's a very challenging process. What I'm going to do today as well, and that's a little unique, I had to pick a different set of references to be able to give you some information about, kind of how you come up with ideas in the first place and get them slightly off the ground. So we'll go through that at the end of today's, and that allows us to start really narrowing it down on a few key aspects for the following 4 hours. So just very briefly on Wednesday, one big thing we're going to talk about team, how you actually, once you figured out that your idea has a use, how you go about that. And this is really, oh, there was one other thing I wanted to mention. It's, just to frame as best I can what we talked about on the first lecture about creation of value and then capturing value. So we will be very, very clear. We are going to spend most of our 6 hours in this area, and it's for one good reason. It's where I have the most experience. So once I really master this side, maybe I'll do 6 hours on that. But for now, we'll stick mostly to how you create the value, which looks easy, but it's a very, very demanding task. And we've talked about it a little bit on the first hour, and I'm going to summarize it, but also include a few additions. So we're here on the value creation, so I'm going to tie this right here. And if you remember, we had the business canvas. That's what the NSF says you do first when you have an idea. And I know it looks terrible because it's got all these boxes to put information in, and instead of making your life hard again, if you remember, in the center of it is the value proposition. So let's say we'll call it VP here. And we'll get back to that through the whole 6 hours because it looks easy, but it's the hardest part. There were at least 4 people that got back to me since the lecture on Thursday. And one example about filling in this chart in the context of clothing, for example, which is outside our technology, but actually when you go to software and things that are on the consumer market, you actually want to worry even more about your customer discovery. So a lot of the techniques are actually found in other areas, and to be honest, we have to apply it just to a certain extent. We don't have to be as good, in my opinion, and if you're doing customer discovery for software. We can make some mistakes, some assumptions a little bit more. But here the value proposition, what she said, is talking to the end customer, the people that will go through the aisles and pick the clothes, was not as useful as the retailers, so the people that decide where to put clothes and which one to buy. Those are the people who know at the end of the day what the customer do. So we were talking about how do you get to know about what's going to happen with your technology. Well, a lot of times chances are that you are talking to a market that already has a way to adopt technologies, and maybe it is the consultants in the industry that end up deciding and evaluating, and then it's moved on to the end customer. If we're talking about a business sales, so you have people that are hired by the large organization who's, let's say, your end customer. Let's say we're talking about something new for a car again. Let's go back there. There is going to be people that their job is to figure out what's going to go in the next car, and it may very well not be the automaker. So, we want to be clear on that. So you make that plan. The first one here, you have your value proposition. You say, well, this is really going to fulfill an important need, and I'm going to do my best to get there. And then You go out and you get the trouble, okay? You will, it's just part of the process. I don't think it would be possible to know what's and that's part of the journey. That's why it's hard. It's because you can't predict everything that's going to happen. But the best thing you do is you say, you know what, I made a mistake, okay, what I thought wasn't right. And then you move on, you ask yourself the next question. So when we go into this business canvas and you're finding out, oh, actually this customer, he told me that you'd rather, like in the case of our technology, we do this non-destructive test, say, oh, you'd rather do a cutout because it's not that expensive. Okay. So you gotta know and you move on. You try something else. You either try somebody like him that may just have a different experience, or you move into a different segment of potential use for your technology. So don't expect that this is going to be easy. If you haven't done the boxing, you have to have learned to take the hit, because otherwise you'll get very, very frustrated with the process. Okay, so the other thing that I know I mentioned very briefly, but I'm going to emphasize a little bit more today, is you don't need the very detail of how your innovation works to present it to a customer. Now, you don't want to just have an idea. So, you know, what my suggestion here, this is an example with our technology. We have a tool to test on the pipe without cutting the pipe. That's what it is. So, if I could go back 3 years, I would present it that way and say, and we lab validated it. Somebody did a master's degree and talked to Professor X and Y and Z, and they'll tell you that it's going to work. So let's not worry about whether it works. Now let's worry about you. If I have this for you, a box that can go on the pipe to test the strength, are you interested? You put yourself in a slightly better perspective here because you're not pushing your idea forward to a point where they won't be able to say no. So by not showing exactly how much work you put into it, you'll get a more honest answer. And that's really, really key to this process here. And we're going to spend probably about 20 minutes on this because it's so important to be able to put yourself in a position when you ask the question, you'll get you'll get the true answer as opposed to the answer that you want to get. So, those are two very, very different things when you're talking to someone. Yes?
At this point, you've already focused on pipes, so this can't be used for other things.
Oh, very good question. So we talk about my examples here of testing on a pipe that I've already narrowed it down, and we're going to go through that next lecture. Yeah, because we're still in the overview, and it's very easy to, you know, we could just spend 6 hours on how you get your customers on board or how you figure out who they are. But it's a very, very good question. Before you focus, you do have to evaluate all your options, and we'll start with that next time. Yes, very good question. Anybody else? Okay, so the odds are against you. Remember that. Okay, very, very important. We're all smart. We can all work really, really hard, and despite all that, the statistics just, I won't even put a number, but they're not good, okay? So if you think that's going to be easy, that's why they talk more about how it happened that it didn't work, because there's a lot of statistics on that. If you look at this chart, they had they evaluated 300 startups that didn't work because they built something that the customer was not going to buy. That's a lot, 300. So they couldn't make this chart as sophisticated for the people that succeeded. Otherwise, it would be the next slide. So we don't have that one. And we're not going to go through the details, but when it rains, it pours. So if you are leading this and things are not going to plans, it is your problem, okay? It's not somebody else. You started this, okay? And therefore, you want to avoid that. And we talked about the business canvas, but we're going to spend just a few more minutes here before we dive into each segments of the module. We're going to talk about a few things here. So the business canvas is the customer and versus your technology, right? Is that going to solve that need? And I think we covered a good overview of that. So we'll take that as number one. And a lot of people will say you do need a good team, a team that's fit for what you're going to do. We'll talk about that more next lecture. And then the focus, and what we're going to do with the focus, because I'm taking the order from the chart here, just to make things a little easier. Focus, at the end of the day, is the first thing that's going to bring any funding into your startup. and it is a topic that is very important because a lot of things that we have to do to succeed with the innovation will cost money, because it's not just about making calls. It's going to a conference and spending daytime hours very soon and then building stuff to convince yourself, filing patents, retaining attorneys of all different levels for your team to set up some good paperwork. So take a thing here also as including some paperwork. If you don't have any paperwork, you're not setting yourself for raising money. So when I mentioned raising money here in terms of focus, this process of doing the customer discovery, it will bring you money. And we'll talk about that a little bit more today, because National Science Foundation, when you have an idea and you know a little bit what you're going to use it for, it's $220,000 to give you to spend over 6 months. And that's non-dilutive, it's government money. Now to get that, you will need to work already. And you better either have some of your own money or some people that really believe in you, and they say you're young enough, you may or may not succeed on this one, but I'll put some money. And with the idea that even if you don't succeed, I'll know you better, you'll be better, and I'll put some money later again, okay? So it's a very, very tedious process here to be able to get started. And I'll tell you for my case, I started by putting on my own money, okay? $50,000 out of pocket. And you know what that did? When my uncle said, oh, well, you must believe it. He had no idea, okay? He's not an engineer, but he said, okay, well, if you don't have money and you put in 50, I'll help you, I'll put 50, okay? And then all of a sudden, now you have $100,000 to be able to go for some government money. It may not be in your own ability, and that's why the team aspect becomes important here, because the chances are you'll find a friend that has an uncle, okay? If you don't have yourself an uncle. If you don't, then try to make friends, okay? I'm serious here, because it's called, and the word here is called bootstrapping, okay? Technology, innovation, you're not going to get a check because you're smart. It's just not going to happen unless you really have a special friend. Like there's an MIT faculty that's just going to put their name on this and tell everybody this is going to be the greatest thing, and then, the venture capital are going to get involved even before you've got anything going. It happens, okay? But if we're talking about somebody like me who's starting with, a few good ideas, a few ideas on how to be useful for, but then you have to take it tread by tread and walk through the road. And again, it's going to run like crazy, okay? It's not going to be easy. So we talked about bootstrapping. I'll get back to it when we talk about the team, because after the customer, it's probably the second most important thing. I mean, so disclosure, I've never watched a Shark Tank episode, but I'll commit to watch at least 2 before this month was over. Okay. So what it means is the first thing that you don't want to do is give a part of your company away, okay? Because first of all, you don't really know exactly how much it's worth yet to you, and therefore the people have no idea either, okay? You have to get are you going to be able to get the technology itself out there, convince people to invest in the technology, and then getting the customer to spend all the time with you to get them into their process of being used. I mean, if you find somebody that's going to write a check just because of the idea, it must be either a really, really good idea, or they are maybe making a mistake, and we'll talk about that. How even successful entrepreneurs are going to make bad bets, okay? Too early kind of things. So yeah, bootstrapping covers kind of the overall concept here, and it's the hardest thing because you know, we all typically, you'll have some experience, you may have some money, you may have no money at all, and you know, the traditional way of thinking of a career is you accumulate as opposed to you know, start by losing it, okay? Putting it out there to lose. So I don't know, does that make any sense, the bootstrapping? Any questions? Why I'm mentioning that right now, and things like that? Yes.
Question about the time commitment.
Yeah.
It seems like it's a full-time job, but it doesn't seem like you're full-time, right? You spend time teaching,
Yeah.
lecturing.
Okay, the question is whether it's a full-time job. It's a really, really good question. Some people will take it as a full-time job, some won't. And I'll throw already the example here of Bill Gates. Bill Gates did take it as a full-time job, but he had his way to mitigate his own risk because he had applied for a leave of absence with the university for 1 year, and he had the agreement with his parents they were going to cover his living expenses. Okay, so I mentioned that together because whether you're going to be able to go full-time or not depends what kind of risk mitigation you have early on when you should not be saying, I'm going to go for this for sure. I mean, intrinsically we could say Bill Gates thought about it, I'm going to try it for 1 year and then I'm going to go back to the university if it doesn't work, okay? So if you're able to leave your job for a year and sustain yourself, that could be how you get started and you're able to do a lot of these things fast. But you asked about me, I got that question. For me, no, I went in very gradually. I went in very gradually because I had a very profitable consulting organization doing a lot of projects. And to some extent, I was able to go meet the customer as part of the same trip. You know, you have to go for a project that you're getting paid on, and then you take the opportunity to make some meetings on things that you think you really, really want to pursue. Without the ability to be able to do that for a whole year, I don't know. I don't know that I would have done it. And some of the aspect here is you can't force your thought process to go faster sometimes. And this is going to be the discussion about idea generation. There'll be people saying, well, I have to quit my job so I can really think hard on this. Well, maybe, but this is really where we're going here, and let's go ahead and talk about ideas, because when you have ideas, this is really, really the exciting part, okay? Because, you know, things are going well, you just took a shower, or you're out there playing sport, maybe on the beach, or fishing, or golfing, no matter what it is you like to do, you're just having a grand time, and you're sort of reflecting on things that you worked on this past few years, maybe this past 10 years, this past 20 years, and you say, well, what if this didn't have to be this way, okay? So for example, when I'm mentioning that I went into this gradually, so I make a trip to Houston, which is where the oil and gas industry is, and I have back-to-back meeting, and they tell me stuff that I want to hear, a lot that I don't want to hear, and then I have to put it all together in my head. And it's not just a question of man hours, saying, oh, this week, this is all I did. You know, I thought about this. It's just a very, very irregular process, is the least I'll say. So, and this should be very personal, but for me, ideas will come after working really, really hard and letting my brain do whatever he wants with all that, you know, these moving pieces. So I've never really been able to come up with a really, really good idea myself by sitting with a piece of paper here and working it out. It never worked for me, okay? It may work for others. But from what I'm glancing, talking to other people, one of them very successful in oil and gas, and what he told me is, yeah, I mean, his best ideas are going to come up when he's mowing the lawn. And at some point, that's how you have your confidence, right? Because it's like, oh, I need some ideas, I'm going to go and mow the lawn, and it could very well work for you, okay? When I was a student, I know taking a shower is the best thing for you, because, you know, you got to get your, first of all, you got to move on. You can't be in front of your piece of paper. It just won't happen, okay? And maybe that's the only thing I really need. Maybe I could go for a walk and have the same experience. But for me, taking a shower, yeah. All of a sudden, things have to go. You don't have, you know, all your books. You don't have all in front of you. So, it's again, this is not a very, you know, frequently traveled territory. What we're talking about here, and I think one of the reasons is it is not the same for everyone. But the two ideas that I put forward is you got to work hard. I mean, if you don't put yourself out there trying to do things, maybe you may have very, very good ideas, but are they going to be applicable to the problems you have? So you put all your problems in your head, then you let them play together, and with a little bit of faith, and eventually something's going to happen. So we're going to go back to how I decided that this was something that I was going to do. So we're in year 2010, so 7 years ago, or 8 years ago. And I'm under the Longfellow Bridge, which probably see if we lifted this here, we'll see it right there. It's the Red Line Bridge. One of my boss at the consulting company said, "Simo, we don't want to throw that bridge down. That's the, you know, the city. It's actually the Department of Conservation and Recreation. DCR is a very important department in Massachusetts because there's a lot of aging infrastructures that we have to maintain or decide what we're going to do with it. Can we maintain them safely?" So that was the question being asked to the principal engineer, and you know, his first reaction would be, well, if I can cut it all up, I'll tell you if the bridge's good, okay? I'm going to go and figure out if there's cracks anywhere, and we're not going to go here to the detail. I don't have the detailed drawing of the bridge, but if you've ever taken the dock tour, you'll see it's a very intricate structures. It's got rivets, it's got all sorts of pieces of metal stacked together, sandwiched together. If you want to know about the piece of metal that's in the middle there, good luck. I mean, you don't see, if you can't see it, how do you know it's good? And there's a lot of them, and it's the entire bridge. Now, one good thing is that bridge does have redundancy, okay? It's got 5 or 6 arches. Now, when you think of it though, the arches that are holding the Red Line train, it's not all 6, okay? It turns out it's also an area where there's been corrosion over the years and a lot of cycles, because I was under that bridge. It was reduced speed back those days for the train traveling, but everything will still be vibrating like that. Okay, so, I mean, first of all, the good thing, just a little bit that we're talking about bootstrapping, I was getting paid to be there, okay? But I was feeling the need for something that was not there, because we had our hardness testers, okay? And we were paid full rates to try to go and poke the metal to learn something. Oh my gosh. I mean, we spent days there. We also had somebody looking for cracks, anomalies. There were 2 key questions that were being asked of my team back then. The first one was, how good is the steel? Because it was made in the early 1900s. So it was known to be steel, but that was about it. Okay, it wasn't like, oh, it's the exact same grade, and you know, we know all about it. So it was mild steel, to the best knowledge we knew. The other aspect was, well, we don't really know how much the bridge has moved over the past 100 years, so we don't know if some piece of metal has been stretched already, so they don't have the ductility that they had originally. And then there was another question that I knew very well existed, it still exists as of today, is, okay, in those days, you know, the bridge was built and is able to take loads, including today's load. But what happens if you have a seismic event? Is that still going to be good? Can we test it out? Most generally, you can't. So how do you know? So you have to build up all that experience. You have to know certain things about the structure that people never even thought about when they built it in the first place. So it's a very, very challenging process to think about aging infrastructure. Now, a lot of things that happens in startups, technology innovation, I believe also is timing, because that day in 2010, I was not even thinking at all about my thesis, but it got me to start thinking about it again. So I did my thesis on a new version of a hardness tester. I started that because I did an industrial internship at a large oil and gas company, it turns out, and they had issues with wear that I thought maybe we would resolve them with the type of test that we were doing here in the nano lab if I changed them. If instead of doing indentation, I did frictional sliding. That was my whole idea. And my thesis advisor said, that's going to be really, really hard. Good luck to you if you would do that. If you succeed, you get your degree, but just be mindful, this is going to be really hard. The other thing that my thesis advisor said, Simon, you got to work on something. This is science I'm asking you to do, because I am an engineer, okay? So I came here, I did a PhD, but it was to go back to engineering. That's really what I was deciding the day I moved into the building. And he said, that's fine, that you want to be an engineer, but you got to find a thesis topic that's science. And the science, I'd like you to think that it's only going to be useful in 10 plus years. That was what he said. Turns out my thesis advisor, Professor Suresh, was head of National Science Foundation, so he had some insight into how this process of going from research to engineering was coming into play. So I was a student of him before he did that, of course, but yeah, so I put the timeline here because I do get the question. So this is really my full timeline. 2003, I said, I'm not going to do a topic of indentation. Everybody else in the group was doing that. And I could have done it because, and even after me, there was another student who still poked the material. And then eventually things started to change. But, so instead of doing hardness indentation, it's frictional sliding. When we go to the technology, I can show you a lot of stuff about that. But we're going to go by topic here. So let's say it's a thesis, it's done, you go to work, and then start thinking, yeah, well, maybe I was right. You know, maybe this test would really be useful. Because I had this idea that I would change the hardness tester, but after my thesis was done, a lot of the students, even doing mechanical studies in the department, and I was actually talking to one last night, was saying, well, Simon, this is complicated. It's more complicated. Of course, it's new. Everything new is complicated. So you face that inertia even with the academics, okay? The academics are like, well, we've been doing this for more than 100 years. We've been doing hardness testing. So what you're saying sounds cool, but it's complicated. And, you know, I had to think about that. And this is actually the customer discovery again. You know, the other people other than you saying, I'm not going to use this. And I probably could have asked more questions. I actually did. And then the answer was complicated. It was all the data analysis. So, okay. I guess we're going to have to do the data analysis ourselves. Let's say back then I would have gone forward and say, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to push this tool to replace the other tool, which I didn't do. I waited. And this is a concept that we're going to talk about. The innovation aspect here is, it's all timing. If I put myself in a position saying, I'm going to make a portable device like I showed you to put on the pipeline, back, pick a time here, 2010 for example, how I was going to be able to fund my own time back then and have the network to do everything. So I pretty much took the time it took. And the real first idea for me was to have a self-guiding system. So this whole instrumentation goes on the pipe, and all of a sudden, you're not subject to vibration of anything. We essentially have a tripod in our machine that sticks to the pipe, and from the tripod, you have all the sensors going down. So it's very, very stable. You can take the tripod, you can put it anywhere, on the pipe of different diameter, if all your sensors are in the center, it's easy. So that was one of the first idea that wasn't out there, that deserved a patent application. But then it was still, oh my gosh, there's going to be so much work to do to get things to this next step. So we were back here in 2013, and the first thing that, I thought it was on some of the slides, but it isn't. Something happened to the slides, but it's good because now I can go a little faster. Went to the big company. I had this idea, could you build it for me? Okay. No. Because they're smart, they've been through this. If we build it, we're not going to sell it. Okay? It's going to cost this much to build it, and we're going to be able to sell it. So there is a process. And here's what the National Science Foundation thinks of the process of taking an idea to commercialization. And I can't say that I like every aspect of it, but, and on the slide there's a reference. It's not a very old chart, but if you go to the green line all the way to the left, it says National Science Foundation overall. So they invest a lot of money to have a discovery. But then they have other charts, and the program that I was mentioning has dollars for you by the time you have the idea and the customer, is the SBIR program right here. So it's just closer to the development stage where the idea goes from a discovery to being used. But the real use is tough. It's tough because everything that needs to be refined takes a lot of effort. It's the whole engineering process of making sure that you fulfill the function and you're going to do it reliably, consistently, and all of that. So we're at the stage of commercialization here, and there's the valley of death right in the center. So I don't want to oversimplify it, but I'd like to think that the valley of death is somewhere here between when you transition from one side to the other. Not because I want to think it's that way, but it kind of makes sense because there is going to be a point that clearly the technology is a betterment and there is a need for it, but there are still so many steps to take before it actually is brought commercial. So that's really what that chart is. So I hope that between my little story, what the National Science Foundation, and by the way, the SBIR program is a 2-year program. And they put it right there. So there is an acknowledgement that typically things take a lot of time. The harder it is, the longer it's going to take. And the timing aspect is very, very important. Now, that's a little contrary to what we've talked about here, saying that as for a technology startup, you have to get past this in a 2-3 year time frame. We really talked about this last the first lecture. So where you start is not just your motivation. You have to think about whether it actually makes sense given the status of development of this idea that you have. And a lot of times in this entrepreneurship world is to balancing the odds. If I wait another year to quit my job, am I going to be a lot more likely to be able to make it through this? And a lot of times probably the answer is yes. Okay? And you can think, oh, it's such a great idea, somebody else got to think of it. Well, in my case, I thought about that. But then you do need to think about it twice. Well, who else is working on this? And the reality is very few generally, okay? So if you're working on something that 3 other people are working, well, yeah, you want to be careful. Yes?
Quick question on your timeline.
Yes.
So when you said back previously.
Oh boy.
You said 2012 back in research.
Yeah.
Is that specifically research on this idea?
No, other topics, yeah. But I knew I wanted to do it. I knew I wanted to go back a little bit and refresh my memory in academia, and that it was a project on structural materials, but nothing at all related to what I was was doing. It's a good question, yeah. But it was a departure from the daily, you know, handling the customer type stuff. I was able to take a little bit more time on the water to reflect on all these hard things. Okay, well, this is really the aspect of our originality, and I'm glad that we sort of really went through this process of describing my story, because it's hopefully going to make sense. And this is a book I read halfway through, to be honest. That's what I do a lot. When I feel like I've got something out of it, I put it away and I move on to the next one. So about ideas. A lot of times it does require you to take this leap of faith that it's not because things have been a certain way that they will always be that way, okay? So you have to have that in your mind if you're going to come up with ideas, in my opinion. And before you have the idea, at least from my personal experience and talking to others, you've been challenging yourself already. Okay, you've already worked on this problem, this problem, this problem, this problem. Then you're like, well, okay, I guess I'm just going to take a break here. And then all of a sudden, these things kind of combine themselves by some form of miracle, and you probably won't like the outcome. It's going to be like, well, I shouldn't be doing this. This is too hard. But maybe you have an idea, and you write it down, and you give it some thoughts, and then you have another one, and then you have another one. And we'll talk about that, about prototyping and product development, because that's really where it also plays in. So I don't have a chart on this, but the idea is, it's very well established that to people that challenge themselves doing different things in art are the Nobel Prize winners in mathematics or, you know, politics, whatever, because they've tried so many different things. They push their brain closer and closer to certain limits that eventually it does combine. The nature force itself. The more ideas, the better. So Edison had more than 1,000 patents. They were not all good, okay? And even this electricity with the, I think it was the DC current, it apparently wasn't the best, but he pushed it, right? And that's what we're going to talk about more about the second aspect. So I've got two things going on with you here. We'll talk about ideas and then the entrepreneurship, because they go hands to hand. So we're halfway through here, lots of ideas, and a lot of times with respect to technology, it is not a blue sky idea, like, oh, this is the new way of thinking about life, for example, okay? If we're talking about hardcore technology, the more that you've experienced it, like in my case, my thesis work was taking pieces of instrument and bringing it to the piece of metal. That's what I did. So I started having ideas about how to do that better than the way people were doing it, because I worked on it so hard, okay? And the intuition is trustworthy on things that you have experience with. So this is the Steve Jobs example that's given in the book, that he invested in Segway, or he really wanted to invest in Segway, this little two-wheel thing to go around. This is completely new. This is like a computer. This is going to allow, you know, now you're going to need a drink delivery to it, you know, when you're going by the street, things like that, and it's going to change the world. But it wasn't for him to decide. He had no idea about transportation. He was a communication guy. So had he worked in trying to get an electric car going, trying to get other devices associated with transportation, he wouldn't have been so bold in saying, this is going to work, this is ready for creation. Okay, so his gut wasn't right because he wasn't working in this area. So I thought I'd mention that here, because that's really an important aspect. Okay, ideas by themselves are not very useful, and believe me, when you go out, and I mentioned about my thesis advisor, I mean, it was his area. He said, well, I think that's maybe too difficult for you, but I'll let you try. that's what you game for. So be aware that people are going to say, this is up to you, okay? So if you don't succeed, I told you, okay? So you don't have to worry. You know, people will do that to you. They'll say, oh, that might be a good idea. And we'll leave it up to you, really. So this is probably one of the most important things with respect to entrepreneurship, that the risk is there. And for me, it's not that I don't see it, it's that I don't panic. Okay. I'm willing to go and do something. Okay, I really am. The train starts taking off. I mean, safety, I'm getting much better at it. But growing up, you know, on the farm, you know, tractor is leaving, you just jump right on, okay? Because you don't want them to stop again, the rain's coming, okay? So you gotta think fast. Is this safe to do? Oh, there's a little fire here. Let's get the extinguisher, okay? You don't think twice. You gotta move really, really fast. It's not easy, but it's important. Now, it can be crazy, okay? This is not gonna work here, guys. Let's get out of here, let's move on. So, I hope I emphasize in here the idea of speed, okay? Because we've talked about the timing aspect, but this is not timing here. It's when you're on the street, you have to face the risk, and it's not easy. But you don't want to ignore it. You just trying to mitigate it. And we've talked about Bill Gates, but it's everywhere on how you build a portfolio of certain things. Are you going to take a lot more risk on, because the consequences is you don't move forward. Okay, that's fine, but you know, being able to start the foundation here, building something that you know has a need, you don't have a choice. You want to take as little risk as possible on having an end to the tunnel. Now, which tunnel you take, you better take 5, okay? Because you don't know which one is leading somewhere. Right? That's where you need a team, and if you think you're going to do it all yourself, good luck to you on technology. Okay? If you have an idea and you can build the software yourself, maybe. But even that, a lot of people are going to try to do the same. If we take a Facebook, pretty soon he had a big team to make this happen, because otherwise it'd be somebody else taking the idea over. We talked about Bill Gates. I think it was not too bad of an example. Now the risk, you don't look for risk, because it's not the more you expose yourself to risk that you're going to succeed, okay? The risk will find you. You don't have to look for it. There are going to be people that say, I want to play the lottery here, and I'm going to find a place that I can put a bet. That's not what we do as entrepreneurs. We try to avoid those bets as much as possible, build contingencies in the plan, so you are able to move ahead with faith. I use that sentence a lot. If you go through my emails maybe a year and a half ago, when things are just like, oh, how are we going to take from where we are now where we absolutely need to be for next year? And you're saying if any reasonable person here would start thinking this is not going to work. But if you can't see it work, nobody else will for you. Okay, that's what entrepreneurship is, and it's a big lesson in technical consulting. You know, if you don't really believe you're going to help your customer, I mean, what are you thinking? That all of a sudden they'll believe you more than you believe yourself? No. Okay, so I stayed on focus, and what I perhaps want you to get out from this class is the real concept that nothing here is continuous. Nothing is easy. You can't set the schedule. You have to make plans, right? That's where we start. And then you have to be willing to adjust depending on what happens. The whole process of having ideas, I have to say that it's always important. It's always a good thing to cultivate in your own life. You know, maybe you've been playing golf for 15 years. Maybe you start thinking about doing something a little different, maybe. And then that's where you start realizing, well, maybe I could try this one, or at least do it this way, or whatever. And then all of a sudden you become more original. But you may stand out, because if you're good at golf and you quit, everybody's going to be like, why are you quitting? Well, I'm going to try to have more fun doing something else. You haven't done that yet, because now you're going to move on and learn something completely new. But I'm sharing with you the kind of things that you have to be willing to do. I've been a lot of people looking at you saying, what are you doing here? You were making so much money, having so many good things going for you, and then you're leading yourself into this new thing that is a very big process. You know, you think you have a way out of this, and then halfway through it, you realize, oh, it's not working. I gotta make something different. And if you don't put yourself, if you don't challenge yourself saying, I want to attack this, chances are you're not going to do it. So whether you really are in trouble, like you're going to run out of money, or you really have to answer to some people, what have you been doing with your time this past couple of years? There's going to be a time in this process where you feel that you have to come up with something, okay? Because otherwise it's trouble, and it is part of the innovation process. Whether it's technology or in this one, other things, is you push yourself out there, and then eventually you may have to something, okay? But just like what we said, that's not yet. It's just a new beginning, because it's a long battle. It's years and years. And we'll cover more on Wednesday. Thank you.